Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Aprilmarillion, our month-long celebration of the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have a deluxe illustrated edition here, but this has existed in many, many copies since it first appeared. This was crafted together from writings and plots and outlines and long finished speeches by Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien's son, uh, to forge a book about the legendarium that underlies the events of the Hobbits and the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. In the Hobbit, and then especially in the Lord of the Rings, the reader is unavoidably aware of the deep lore and history through which the story is treading. It's not heavily weighted down, but it is there at all times, helped in large part by the fact that A, the Lord of the Rings, the character who is the villain of the book, has lived through all of that history. B, one of the primary protagonists of the book, Gandalf the Wizard, has lived through all of that history. And C, a major group of characters in The Lord of the Rings, the elves, have lived through a lot of that history. So it is not dead and gone. It's a point that comes up over and over again in Lord of the Rings, that the past is not dead and gone. There are not only active memories and hot partisan resentments, but also people who were there when it happened. Not always when any of this happened. This is deep, deep history. This is Tolkien's Old Testament. This is him relating the very beginnings of his fictional world. And we're going to read through it. We're going to buddy read it and celebrate it all throughout the month of April. We're going to do Aprilmarillion. So this deluxe edition has end papers that are a rather nice map. Tolkien maps are a subject on their own. But we're going to start off here with the first part of the Silmarillion, which is the Ainulindale. This is the story of the Ainur, who are the divine beings in Tolkien's cosmology. There are gods in his cosmology. There didn't need to be, but there are. And Tolkien himself is a devout Catholic, and he brings to his fantasy version of what we have to call a religion. We have to call it a religion. We have to call these religious beings. They want to be worshipped. Some of them do anyway, or feared, or both. And they have a hierarchy. And Tolkien can't help but bring to this system all the problems with exactly that kind of system in Christianity. And you're going to see what I mean. There is one main god, Eru Iluvatar. That is the first line here. There was Eru, the one, who in Arda is called Iluvatar, and he made the first Ainur, the holy ones, who were the offspring of his thought. So he is the font of everything. And not only did he create all of the Ainur, and not only is he more powerful than any of them, or all of them put together, echoes of Zeus from the Olympian pantheon, but also, like the Christian God, he knows everything that is going to happen. He has a plan. He has a plan that he has laid out from before the foundations of the earth. Which is that you get a lot of problems that way, a lot of them that you need not have. You can't really avoid them in Christianity because it's 2,000 years old. But Tolkien didn't need to make this way. But instead, he does. And we get a scene in heaven, basically. We get a scene where Eru is presenting the Ainur with a song, with a melody, when suddenly chaos erupts. I'll read you that passage. He's singing his song about the flame imperishable when suddenly a discordant note is heard. And all of a sudden, he's vying with someone else's melody. Then Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that he smiled. And he lifted up his left hand, and a new theme began amid the storm, like and yet unlike to the former theme, and it gathered power and had new beauty. But the discord of Melkor is the most powerful of the Ainur, and he is the one who's introduced the second melody. When he didn't need to, and also he didn't need to be allowed to continue doing it. Once he did it, he could have been told, stop that. But he isn't told that. Instead, but the discord of Melkor rose in uproar and contended with it. And again there was a war of sound more violent than before, until many of the Ainur were dismayed and sang no longer, and Melkor had the mastery. Then again Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that his countenance was stern. And he lifted up his right hand, and behold, a third theme grew amidst the confusion. And it was unlike the others, for it seemed at first soft and sweet, a mere rippling of gentle sounds in delicate melodies, but it could not be quenched. And it took to itself power and profundity. And it seemed at last that there were two musics, progressing at one time before the seat of Iluvatar, and they were utterly at variance. The one was deep and wide and beautiful, but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow from which its beauty chiefly came. The other had now achieved a unity of its own, but it was loud and vain and endlessly repeated, and it had little harmony, but rather a clamorous unison as many trumpets braying upon a few notes. And it essayed to drown the other music by the violence of its voice, but it seemed that its most triumphant notes were taken by the other and woven into its own solemn pattern. But it's not just vying with Eru's song, it's trying to drown it out. And these Ainur were created by Eru, including Melkor. And they all show him deference, they all show him obedience, except this. Why is this permitted? In the midst of this strife, whereat the halls of Iluvatar shook and a tremor ran out of the silences yet unmoved, Iluvatar rose a third time, and his face was terrible to behold. Then he raised up both his hands, and in one chord, deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, piercing as the light of the eye of Iluvatar, the music ceased. I think we can take from that description the fact that not only did Iluvatar not anticipate what Melkor would do, but that he doesn't like it. I think those are easily read into the text. Why does his face change from happy to angry? Unless he's displeased. And the minute you do that with a God who is all-powerful, all-seeing, and sees the future, the same questions come up in Christian theology, which is, if that's true, why didn't he know it was going to happen? Why did he allow it to happen? And why doesn't he just erase it and start over? If he's so upset with the way this melody came out, why doesn't he tell the Ainur, Melkor included, all right, I'm going to sing another melody, and I want everyone to join in except Melkor. Or I don't want anybody to join in. But anyway, that song, unbeknownst to the Ainur, is creating the world of Arda, out in the darkness, out in the void. It's happening through their own actions, which is why all of them will have an element of that creation. They just don't know it yet until they go out and see it. Let me get you the scene where they do that. We get the artist here is Ted Naismith. We get some wonderful artwork there. The world, before any light at all. When the Valar entered into Ea, the world, they were at first astounded and at a loss, for it was as if naught was yet made which they had seen in vision, and was all but on point to begin, but yet unshaped, and it was dark. For the great music had been but the growth and flowering of the thought of the timeless halls, and the vision only a foreshadowing. But now they had entered in at the beginning of time, and the Valar perceived that the world had been but foreshadowed and foresung, and they must achieve it. So began their great labors in wastes unmeasured and unexplored, and in ages uncounted and forgotten, until the deeps of time and in the midst of the vale of the halls of Ea there came to be that hour and place where it was made the habitation of the children of Iluvatar. They craft the world. They've sung it, but now they have to make it. And into this work the chief part was taken by Manwë and Aule and Ulmo, but Melkor too was there from the first, and he meddled in all that was done, turning it, if he might, to his own desires and purpose, and he kindled great fires. And he says later that this shall be my own kingdom, and I will name it unto myself. And for some reason, he is incredibly effective against the other Ainur, when he shouldn't be. Even one-on-one with Manwë, he should not be that efficient, that able to just have everything his own way. But against all of them together? But nevertheless, Manwë says to him, Manwë is the foremost of the Ainur, other than Melkor, and he says to him, "This kingdom thou shalt not take for thine own, wrongfully, for many others have labored here no less than thou." So Tolkien is giving us here very much old language, King James language. And the Valar continue to walk around the world and shape it as they will. And Melkor sees it, and he is filled with anger and jealousy. Then Melkor saw what was done, and that the Valar walked on earth as powers visible, clad in the raiment of the world, and were lovely and glorious to see and blissful, and that the earth was becoming as a garden for their delight, for its turmoils were subdued. His envy grew then the greater within him, and he also took visible form. But because of his mood and the malice that burned in him, that form was dark and terrible, and he descended upon Arda in power and majesty greater than that of the Valar, as a mountain that wades in the sea, with its head above the clouds, and is clad in ice and crowned with smoke and fire, and the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold. So you see the Old Testament cadence that's being sought for here, and very much achieved. This is lovely. Downright strange. The publishing industry, when this book dawned upon it half a century ago, had little idea what to make of this. Very little idea. A lot of the critics who got this on their desk were not Hobbit fans or Lord of the Rings fans. Most of them didn't know to attach any kind of seriousness to this kind of writing, and they had no idea what this was. None. And then we get the conclusion of the Ainulindale as a very short book of the Silmarillion. Thus began the first battle of the Valar with Melkor for the dominion of Arda. And of these tumults the elves know but little, for what here has been declared has come from the Valar themselves. One of the fun games about the Silmarillion is trying to figure out, much like with Lord of the Rings, is trying to figure out where this all comes from. How does anybody know any of this? Since Tolkien is writing in a world in which this is all writing. And it turns out this comes from the Valar themselves. They would know. The elves aren't around yet. For what here has been declared has come from the Valar themselves, with whom the Eldalai spoke in the land of Valinor, and by whom they were instructed. But little would the Valar ever tell of the wars before the coming of the elves. Yet it is told among the Eldar that the Valar endeavored ever, in spite of Melkor, to rule the earth and to prepare it for the coming of the firstborn. And they built lands, and Melkor destroyed them. Valleys they delved, and Melkor raised them up. Mountains they carved, and Melkor threw them down. Seas they hollowed, and Melkor spilled them. And naught might have peace or come of lasting growth, for surely as the Valar began a labor, so would Melkor undo or corrupt it. And again I ask, why? Why was that allowed? Why was it allowed? Why couldn't they band together and stop him, band together and banish him, or simply go to Eru and say, look, this guy is ruining everything? And the answer they would get from Eru would be, it's all part of my song. It's all part of my melody. I'm not alarmed by any of this. And yet their labors were not all in vain. And though nowhere and in no work was their will and purpose wholly fulfilled, in all things there were hue and shape other than the Valar had at first intended. Slowly, nonetheless, the earth was fashioned and made firm. And thus was the habitation of the children of Iluvatar established in the days of deep time and amidst the innumerable stars. And that is the beginning, a very frustrating beginning. It doesn't really have much of an effect on our later stories, but it's a very frustrating beginning. Tolkien is giving us a cosmology, a theology here, that is every bit as riven with problems, avoidable problems, as the theology he grew up with. Mainly the riot of basically Satan on Earth. But nevertheless, it's grand stuff, and it gets us to a world, which is, I think, the main purpose of this first part of the book, is to get us to a world. Once there's a world, there can be people in the world, the firstborn, and then men. So elves and then men, but a whole bunch of other creatures as well. So this is it starts out right at the beginning, and then we move on to something like knowable time. So that's where Arpilmarillion will continue. We've got this deluxe edition where casual Tolkien fans will know what this front illustration is. It won't be there. There's only one thing that this could really be: the destruction of Numenor. But it'll take a real fan to know what that is, and specifically who those two people are. Let me know if you know. But we're going to move on. We're going to continue throughout the month to celebrate the Silmarillion. So I will wrap this up for now, and we will move on next time. Thank you, BookTube.